Welcome to the True North Compliance Podcast, where we discuss regulatory and compliance issues for Canadian business.
Hello, I'm Sean O'Hara, and thanks for listening. Hello, everyone. My guest today is Steve Pearce, who is a multifaceted professional who balances roles in agriculture, athlete development, and insurance on Vancouver Island. He's the son-in-law of Linda Pendray and is involved with Pendray Farms in North Saanich, where he has a commitment to environmentally responsible farming practices, particularly in waste management that minimizes impact on the farm's high-end neighborhood. Professionally, Steve is the commercial line sales manager at First Insurance Brokers, which is the largest general insurance broker on Vancouver Island and has multiple offices throughout the area. His community involvement is evident through his charitable initiatives, including a notable donation of nearly 450 pounds of grass-fed ground beef from Pendray Farm to the Mustard Seed Food Bank. He also rallied First Insurance to contribute 500 boxes of spaghetti noodles and 500 cans of sauce to the same cause. That must have been a big meal. Steve's educational background includes studies in social sciences at the University of Victoria and program management and sales at Camosun College, which has given him the foundation of his career in agriculture and insurance. He's also the past president of Think Local Victoria and has a few other businesses because Steve likes to create things.
Excellent.
Good way to put it.
Thank you for having me, Sean. This is great.
You mentioned marrying into a farming family, and how does the running the farm? What are some of the issues that you deal with that relate to the various rules, laws, compliance, and so on?
Well, it's interesting when you said you marry into it, you marry everybody in the family. It's a lifestyle, and you learn quickly what that obligation is in farming, especially when you're part of the food chain. You find out that there are so many regulations. It's a lot more difficult than just putting some seeds in the ground and then putting a little kiosk at the end of your driveway to say, hey, come and buy my carrots. When you're in industrial, I'll call it industrial commercial farming, such as dairy, the rules and regulations around production, food safety, food security, health of the animals and health of the farm itself, and the health of the soil is so important that all of those come together as one to produce an amazing product that you see on the shelf, be it cheese, butter, milk, ice cream, you name it, eggnog hit around the holidays. Those are all things that they start in the ground as soil, turns into a plant, turns into food, goes into the animal, and then they produce them. That goes to processing, and processing goes to packaging, and then packaging goes to delivery logistics and onto the shelves for people to buy. So there's a lot of pieces and parts in there.
You've got a variety of different regulations and groups in there, probably thing relating to the health and safety of the animals. That's likely federal level, plus municipal laws, bylaws, environmental impact there.
Exactly. Well, and each one has its own. You want to make sure you start at the top. Where's the licensing start? Or when it's the quota system, obviously, in milk is what are the requirements to fulfill and be responsible for the quota and the production of that. Once you start to handle that portion, then you work down to the next level of, okay, now you have Health Canada and you have animal welfare, and then you have your local BC milk board, and then you have the next level down is simply, can you farm in a way that falls into the criteria that your local government wants you to farm? And managing all of those, of course, causes a lot of friction sometimes, because who is waving the power stick to say, you have to do it this way to comply? So it's a bit of a management.
With farming, there's a fair amount of waste that's produced, and that's one of the criticisms that people often have about especially commercial farms. So how do you deal with the waste management, and then what are even the requirements at the different levels?
There is a environmental farm plan requirement federally, which then brings in provincially. ALC obviously loves that, and so does the local municipal government. And it's all about, are you improving or keeping the soil as is and the water systems around it? So there's a lot of testing of water, a lot of testing of soils. And in farming, of course, people outside of the farm think that a dairy farm smells terrible. To the farmer, it smells amazing because you know that's something that's going back into the land to improve the vitality of the land itself and the soils. Here, back when they first started on Pendray Farms in the 80s, the soil wasn't really ideal, but they were willing to take that challenge to grow and improve and put substance back into it. And you have to keep down phosphate levels. You need to keep down bacterial levels that reach waterways. But because the way it's built out here and how the actual drainage and the tiling that happens on the fields, that water and those people would think are pollutants are not. Manure is a fertilizer, and it's a natural fertilizer. It comes out of the cows. So when you put that in there, how does that water now that filtrates through the soil and the different levels through the soil and through the sandy portions and through the rocky portions, make it back to retention ponds? Well, here it actually comes out cleaner at that end than it did when it started. We've had a lot of questions around what's going on into the creeks into, say, Patricia Bay there. We have 5 shallow wells that the federal government put in because they are doing testing in those creeks and saying, oh, well, we're having high heavy metals and different things showing up in there. Is it coming from the farm? They just wanted to show, is it or is it not? And we could show that it was not at all. It's actually cleaner coming from here than it is anywhere else because of the natural filtration. And we don't put heavy metals onto our farm.
So there's another source of that.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, it comes from roadways and wherever else.
Yeah, just the natural.
Mm-hmm.
You were in a panel discussion where we first met at the Sydney Breakfast Club, and I'll put that podcast into the show notes. You mentioned about how well your dairy cows are treated on your farm. Could you elaborate on that?
There's a lot of activists out there that see things on social media and everywhere else, and people believe that the cows are being harmed in the barns. You know, everyone's seen the videos over time where you can see these cows here and there were mistreated. They believe that means all cows are being mistreated. You know, if you walk through the barns and you can see they have their own salon, there's actually these brushes that they can walk around, they clean themselves, their bedding is changed a couple times a day, and they sleep 16 hours a day, and they get fed and their water and clean feet because we have alley scrapers that keep it so they never have to lie down in their own poop.
You had mentioned too in that discussion that the dairy industry's undergone a 40-year attack, a lot dealing with the US, the way they do things. And can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, with regards to the quota system, it does protect the quality. It protects the farmers and the processing and the products because of there's quality requirements, as well as there is the management of how much is being produced as per the usage and purchasing within Canada. So of course the US is always not like that because it basically seems like free enterprise down in the US. You can have as many cows as you want, produce as much as you want, and attack the market as much as you want. And they want to be able to sell to Canada, just like anything else. They want to export because they produce more. It's expensive to ship liquid. It's expensive to ship heavy things that the dairy products are made of. So the attack is more so about, we should be a customer of theirs. They produce so much of it. They should just accept our product. And from a manufacturing standpoint, the carbon requirements that Canada had federally to reduce, they also looked at that saying, well, farming creates a lot of pollution. So why wouldn't you also just transfer farming down to the US like you have your other manufacturing and just buy everything from us? We'll just consolidate. So there's a lot of ways that they can spin that conversation. But when you can see the employment, the number of farmers across the country, how strong that dairy industry is that the farmers have fought back and said, no, this is well, what are we going to do if we don't farm? What are we going to do? And I did make the comment on how many cows, there's more cows in the Midwest of the United States than there is all of Canada. That's also population bound too. Their production is very different down there, and how they produce, they maximize production. I would say that cow health is not as prominently important as it is in Canada. It's more about production.
And I guess with all farm animals down there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you see it in the swine industry too, for pork production, egg production, broilers with chickens, like whatever the production is, it comes down to the processing and maximizing where processing is being done. And you have this central shipping. Of course, when there's so many people so close to the US border, they feel like, well, we could just send it back up to you. Why do it yourselves? They would prefer to sell to us than us sell to them.
So has the federal government's, let's call it, concern about carbon emissions been currently or potentially impacting your farm?
I think that's why the environmental farm plan came about, was what is it that farms are actually producing? Because it's a lot easier to put a gauge, an actual measurement gauge on a stack at a factory of what pollutants are coming out, versus how do you measure pollution on a farm? How's that happening? Because they just smell manure doesn't mean it's environmentally harmful. What is the harmful portion? Is the gases coming off? So we actually, on the farm itself, we invested into, it's called a manure separation system. Bedding Master is the actual name. So all of the manure went through these pipes, through a screen, and the dry material, the grass it still looks like, fell into this big drum. It takes 24 hours to turn. And the natural bacteria and the heat that is created from that kills all the bad bacteria. And then it spits out in the end. It almost looks like peat moss. And then we were using that because it was so clean. It was cleaner than sawdust for bedding the animals. So you put that back into the bedding, and it reduced mastitis and other health issues that were happening with the cows. They're basically, like, honestly, they're sleeping in their own manure, but it wasn't. It was clean. You can pick it up in your hands. It didn't smell. And then the liquid all went into the pits. And then we used an injection system. So it looked like a big octopus, and it sliced an 8-inch to 10-inch hole in the ground, like little slices. And then it poured the liquid into these holes that were created, these lacerations. So you weren't spraying it into the air. You were just dropping it right into the ground. So 3 things happened there. One is you don't have the same escape of the gases, so people didn't even know we were doing it. Number 2 is that because you were putting less wood, so sawdust, onto the fields, you didn't need as much nitrogen to break down that carbon. So that was nice. That was a cost savings. And then number 3 was the neighbors didn't know what was happening. They would always come over. They're going to have a wedding, and Linda would get a call and say, hey, we're going to have this wedding. Can you shut the farm off for a few days? You're like, well, you can't do that. That isn't how it works. And I'm sorry you built your $14 million home across the street on the water. The farm was here first. But yeah, do your investigating before you decide that's going to happen. But it's true. So there was a real investment. And that's why I said, when you live in a neighborhood like this and in a fishbowl, it was really important to Linda and Dave Pendray to invest in the farm to reduce the attraction to them. They didn't want to be in fights with their neighbors. They wanted to farm properly. And to farm properly, they used technology and finding ways that work for everybody. So work for the municipality, work for BC, work for the milk board, work federally and ticked all the boxes. And that costs money. That takes time and effort and ruffle a few feathers. And then they come back and you're saying, well, we've been doing everything we can here. And now you're worried about this thing. Well, these are the efforts we've made there. So people will give you some leniency sometimes because they see that what you've invested into it.
That seems like a fantastic technology there.
Yeah, it's really neat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that
There is an
actually,
advancement to it, if you want me to share it. The advancement of this bedding master and injecting into the ground is that in between, because cows do produce methane gas, we could have captured even more methane gas by putting in what's called a digester. So it's a big balloon that you put on top of the actual manure and catchment tanks. And from there, that gas can be extracted and it goes through a system that then can be captured. And there was two things that were looked at. Fortis really wanted to do some work with us because they collect a biogas surcharge. People can say, yes, I want to pay into that. So they have this fund. And this fund was also to help capture different types of methane gas. They do that for the panorama for the digester that's down in the septic facility just below, I guess, the highway and Lochside there. So they capture gas there. They use that gas to fire up and warm up the pool. So that was the same thing we're looking at here. So this conversion unit that would be owned by Fortis would be on the farm. We capture the gas, it goes into there, and then they would inject it into the natural gas system in the peninsula. And the amount of homes and the airport, I believe it was 150 homes and the airport would run off of the 300 cows that were being milked here. So the amount of gas to be captured. Problem is that you had to agree to a 25-year commitment to that. So that 25-year commitment meant you needed North Saanich to say yes. You needed, obviously, would the milk quota still exist? Could we continue farming? What is the family farming situation? As well as would that 25-year commitment also be Fortis committing to that for 25 years for being able to pay for itself and make that happen? So, of course, thank goodness we didn't do that because now they can't put any more natural gas builds in. Everything's electric push. So if we had done that, we would have been throwing away millions of dollars, but we could have captured so much methane and make it. So you can see how you have these requirements to capture and do, and then someone makes a decision outside that they don't like natural gas, or natural gas is a pollutant, so we're not going to use that anymore. And that would have put us in a very tight predicament.
That seems like a brilliant technology and a beautiful technology.
Yeah.
A ton of potential, but maybe it comes from people who just don't even know where natural gas or rather electricity comes from. They just think it comes out of the wall and that's it, without realizing all the implications of and where that can come from.
Well, and that's very true, Sean. You look at people see milk on the shelf, and then once they see the farm where it comes from, they're like, oh my gosh, that's disgusting.
Yeah.
It's not. It's a beautiful thing. It is absolutely amazing. What do you think people did 60 years ago, 70 years ago? They just put it into the milk jugs right out of the bucket and drank it.
Yep.
We've been doing that for thousands of years. Just because the last 60 years this has changed, I don't think the human body knows any different. We haven't evolved that much.
Yep. Used to heat greenhouses with manure. Just bring it in because it produces heat.
Exactly. Yeah.
Compost.
Yeah.
I love the thought of a closed system like that.
Yeah. Only makes sense. Honestly, common sense, scientifically, environmentally, financially, only makes sense.
Yeah. We also seem to have this mindset of massive projects, or get the energy from somewhere, even if it's a huge dam in the interior, instead of like those homes in the area would know, look at the farm, wow, I'm getting my energy from there. This is incredibly local. So if there's something that takes out the grid, it doesn't affect your neighborhood.
Exactly. Yeah. Hey, I could have even had a pool in my backyard heated by the cows, and I'd even let them in it once in a while.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like the concept of those closed loops.
Mm-hmm.
That would take a change of attitude, for one, in favor of natural gas,
Hmm.
So that's an issue that Fortis would be struggling with. That and LNG and so on, and people wanting off anything that burns, not to use anything that burns.
Yeah, exactly. And where does the information come from for people to make their decisions on that? Of course, comes from big businesses. We know, the investment into the Sightsee Dam and up in Elk Falls as well, and the amount of effort the government has put into is they put a lot of money into the electrical infrastructure. So of course they want people to use that power and to use it responsibly. If everybody was shifting over to, say, Fortis and everyone went natural gas, there is that side saying, yeah, well, there is environmental impacts there. But when you weigh them out, I think it always comes back to the people are going to support where they put their money, where they put their efforts and their money. They want to make sure there's a return, and they want to make sure that the public that they're doing this for understands that that's the most important thing because we asked for it. Maybe. I don't know if we asked for it. We needed it. I'd love to get in the room if you put everybody in the room, scientists and everybody, and said, okay, let's develop the best ecological environment on the peninsula. What would that truly look like? What could we do here? Well, we don't have any water falling. We have some sun. We've got some wind. We've got some tidal. Well, that wouldn't be enough to power everything out here. So what would we need? We'd probably need some natural gas. We could be self-sustaining, I'm sure, if we put it all together and we did them. So that makes sense. We could grow the food. We could raise the animals. Well, I guess the animals and food's one and the same, but you need the animals to produce manure so you can grow more food too. So it's this evolution of moving around, and what do we do? And the workers here, there's enough workers here that could do that if you'd be okay at getting your hands dirty. So the question isn't, at first, are you excited to grow food? Are you excited to see that food's grown here locally? Yes. Okay, you're willing to get your hands dirty. Well, I'll get my hands dirty. Okay, now you're willing to do that for 8 hours a day to 14 hours a day in the summer, 7 days a week. Oh, no, that's not what work-life balance. Well, no, farming is work-life balance. It is the lifestyle. So here's where we're at now.
So it starts with the will that people have to want to do it,
Yeah,
want to accept, and have to view it positively.
exactly. And it's fun to be outside. Then you just got to make sure you have a good sunblock supply or something. So I don't know if that occurs naturally here other than covering yourself up.
Yeah, the hot and the cold. Yeah, I like the concept, and I've come across instances of communities that could become very self-sufficient even in energy. But there is, and I guess it is there is some regulation, and some people would say we have to protect the environment at all costs. And to an extent, I could agree, but to another extent, I could say we've got to look at what's going to work and what makes a community more resilient. Every disaster movie, the power grid goes down, and then within a few days, we've turned to cannibalism, it seems.
Yeah. The strong survive, but is
Yeah.
it the strong or the strong-willed? The strong-willed who are willing to stay alive. And what is that? What is that gauge? Where's the path when we're talking about the gauge or this path of the difference between suffering and struggling? So you have a catastrophic event. Oh, that meter moves real quick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
What was considered suffering yesterday, today is a welcoming thing.
Yeah.
What do you mean we get to eat macaroni and cheese today? Well, that's all we got. Ah, that's terrible. Unbelievable. Why can't we have mangoes and pineapple? And then, of course, big catastrophic event. And everyone's like, oh my goodness, I don't have to eat ants and dandelions today. I found some macaroni and cheese.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Yeah. Like I've often told people that in the event of an earthquake, when there's a real issue, you've got the tank. You can use
Yeah.
that water. And I know the people who think, okay, as soon as the ground stops shaking, I'm running in with my straw. That's not what I mean at all.
No, exactly. And yeah, exactly. And the banning of burning, I get it. There's a responsibility around burning wood. But if everything shuts down, it's pretty cold pretty fast if you can't burn wood. We don't have any other backup. Propane, I guess, but you don't want to bring propane inside.
That's right.
Carbon dioxide and everything else that comes off is, well, People won't be alive for very long, let's put it that way.
That's
They'll
right.
be sleeping.
Yep. I have a wood stove and 11 Douglas fir trees. So the wood stove's rarely used, but in a
Yeah.
long-term outage, I would be burning in there, warm and to cook.
Yeah. Yeah. Clean up and everything else. But it's outstanding how quickly people change their environmental protection to
Yes.
survival and
Yeah.
being able to dial it. Well, left brain performance, we measure people's skills around attitude, behavior, and characters. That do you have the skills in, say, coaching and learning to be curious and adventurous, or to learn sophisticated, or learn through aestheticism of beauty, or to learn through the openness of someone else's opinion? If you had those skills, you're going to be way more resilient if there was change, to be able to listen to someone else to help you move along. But people get very closed-minded into their own ways and what their passion project is. Passion project versus living are two different things.
Can you elaborate on that?
Someone can be very passionate about a belief, and it can be scientifically there as well. So they're so passionate about it, such as environmental activism or the importance of being environmentally responsible. What is the difference between those two? So living through and always being responsible to the environment versus the passion that the environment's the only thing that matters. So every time something happens, all you're doing is measuring. You're so fixated on it that you forget what the relative impacts are to everyone else around you in the community and the rest of it. So are you open enough to understand and hear somebody else out, or you're just so strong in your stance that it doesn't matter? You're just focused on this one thing, which causes conflict, and conflict removes communication and collaboration. So those that are at each end of either side of the spectrum will never speak to each other because they're so fixated on this one thing. Don't tell me what to do. You have to do this. I'm going to do it this way. No, you can't. Well, if they just start asking whys and impact and what would be the problem if there was a little bit of 10% change and finding some common ground, that would be very different, especially with compliance. And that's where we run into people say, so much red tape. Is there? You can call it red tape, or you can call it a foundation in municipal, provincial, and federal law that has been created because something happened at some time to create what people are calling red tape. No, it's a flag to say, is what you're doing within compliance, and what is the long-lasting effect of what you're doing? Is that consistent with the 80%, or are you in the 20% right now? That's why they have variance committees. That's why they have variance commissions that get put in place to look at the whole story afterwards. But people get so fixated on the red tape, they don't sit to look at the process that needs to happen. So
All rules happen as a result of. I deal with a lot of trades, and one of the things that comes out is WorkSafe, how they will go through job sites and be what they would call very restrictive and have all of these rules. But we do have, I think statistically, it's almost a worker a day who dies in BC. So they're certainly justified because any death is not acceptable. So that's why they are the way they are.
well, exactly. I heard a stat the other day. I had to go and look it up. Did you know that more people are severely injured or killed by a vending machine falling on them than a shark bite, than a shark attack?
Yes.
That is amazing. So why should you strap the vending machine to the wall? Because there's been more people killed by vending machines than there has been sharks.
Yep. And I notice now here, they're all the ones I see are very securely bolted to the wall. They're not going anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not because they don't want you to shake it. Well, it's because they don't want you to kill yourself by shaking
Yeah.
and climbing on it or whatever else people have done. Oh, it's just crazy. Yeah, that's a pretty important safety measure.
Yes. In that panel discussion at the Sydney Breakfast Club, you had mentioned that must do an inventory of our land. What do you mean by that?
There's land protection, and then there is land production. If there was an immediate need of producing food or to have animals or the infrastructure required, water, whatever it may be, to be able to start producing. And what is that timeline also to get it up and running? So the inventory is that inventory accessible? Is that inventory usable? And is that inventory sustainable? So if we took an inventory of the land right now, are people willing to allow accessibility to it, first off? And is that accessibility to that land useful from a sense of being able to work it quickly? So if we wanted to produce food for people to eat, well, if we're eating lettuce and spinach, you have about a couple weeks, it's kind of coming out, but you pick it all, you're done. It's not going to grow any faster. You got to leave it for a few weeks to make that happen. If it's carrots or something else, it's a little longer. If you're raising cattle and getting cattle, you can just kill them. You got to raise calves to raise for meat, or chickens. It's a little quicker, but you still have to find the chicks and keep them in a safe environment. And then water. Is there access to water? Are there wells on site? Are there systems in site that allow for that? Because if infrastructure was broken, the water that comes here from the Souk reservoirs and everything else, you need to make sure that water security is there to make that land sustainable. And are you putting back into the land? Is that plan ready to go so that we understand that you could grow there for more than just a couple of years? That's what I mean by inventory.
So we can continue another time.
Yeah, if you find that, if
Yeah.
if there's some interest there, I mean, I love to talk, Sean, about different things from a lens and bring people into it, and I love to hear people's feedback on it. But I do come from a position of, let's be curious, let's understand science, let's understand sophistication, let's understand people's passions, and how do we help those work together and bring them together.
Yeah, fascinating. I'll have to have you back.
Yeah, well, thank you for even
Okay.
reaching out. This is
Yeah.
fabulous. So,
Great. Thank you so much.
okay. Well, you take care, Sean, and have a good weekend.
All right. My guest today has been Steve Pearce, and that's a wrap.